Hello there. Welcome to this video where you get to learn more on how you can approach various GMAT questions in the GMAT exam. And in these videos, we do select questions from various topics and we work through them together with you to show you how you can approach the questions using various strategies as you learn better approaches and also probably gain a better understanding on how you can do so. My name is Joshua Obuya, trainer and a mentor with the Kenya Elite program under the GMAT training section. In this session, we'll look at the remainders of the data sufficiency section of the Quant on the GMAT exams. These are questions which can get to be tricky, but they are addressable. And let's dive right in and see how to approach these questions. So the first thing we need to know is any data sufficiency question, methodology remains the same. You need to know the concepts, determine what constitutes sufficiency, assess each statement, then pick your answer. And also there is a way in which you need to pick your answers given the choices A, B, C, D, and E listed below. As you assess each statement on its own, then that determines what answer choice you pick. For instance, if you assess the first statement and you find that it is sufficient, then you hold on to A as a possible answer. But that doesn't really conclude that it is the correct answer. You need to still assess the second statement. And if you actually find the first statement to be sufficient, you need to cross out such as C and E, which mean that both statements together are sufficient, but neither statement alone is sufficient because you found the first term to be sufficient. At the same time, as E says that statements statements 1 and 2 together are not sufficient, which may not be true, which is not true because that has already been disproved. If you find the second statement to be sufficient as well, then you will actually do what? Cross out as such as B as the answer. And actually means that each of them are independent and therefore each statement alone is sufficient and such as D, and that will be your answer. And that is how the answer choices tend to progress. If you find the first statement to be not sufficient, you'll cross out answer choice A to D because it is not sufficient, the D. Then if you find B to be sufficient, then B will be your answer. The second statement to be sufficient, then B will be your answer. If B is insufficient, then the first one will be so on and so forth. With practice, you'll get to figure out how this goes and it will make more sense. In case this is confusing, but nonetheless, let's also take a look at them and see how it plays out in our questions. So let's just dive right into the first question. This first category of questions are questions which are more or less in the sub 600 level. But with the remainder type of questions that I have seen in the GMAT exam, many of them are not as easy as would be expected, and therefore they don't fall in the easy category, and they will also be in the higher spectrum of the sub 600 level questions. So these are probably 580 difficulty and 590 difficulty questions, so on and so forth. So let's look at this question. If M and N are positive integers and R is a remainder when 5 times 10 raised to power N is M is divided by 3, what is the value of R? Yeah. So being asked, so how do we first of all go about it? We need to demystify this question term first before we go to the statements. That is how I prefer approaching it because that is the only way you'll be able to determine sufficiency. So if you have 5 into 10 raised to power N, then plus M, and then you divide all this by 3, then it will be equal to, let's say, 3Q plus R. That's what we'll have. So the remainder is what we're looking at. What's the value of R? So we're being asked for this value here. This value of R, that's what we're being asked for. So how do you go about this? How do you get to demystify this? Let's work from what you know. What you know on this side, if you have 5 times 10 raised to the power N, this means you're looking at 5 times 10, 5 times 100, 5 times 1,000, and so on and so forth, of which are even 0 itself, 5 times 1, also 5. So you'll have 5, 50, you'll also have 500, and 5,000. You know, to go further than this. Now, this tests divisibility tests. Remainder questions mainly test the divisibility tests, your knowledge of divisibility tests of numbers, and also what are the patterns that come with those divisibility tests. So for a number to be divisible by 3, all the digits need to be, when summed up together, they need to be a multiple of 3. In this case, all of them, they sum up to 5, which means they're not divisible by 3. Nonetheless, the remainder will be 2, because that's the remainder you'll have if you divide it by 5. It'll be the same all through, since that's what you have. If you want to confirm this, just add 1 to this, 1 to the digit and see. If you add this, 51 is a multiple of 3. 501 is a multiple of 3, 50. Then also 6 is a multiple of 3, like in the first case here. 5001 is a multiple of 3. So which means if you subtract 1 from each of them, you have the numbers of that form, 5 times 10 raised to the power n, and the remainder will be 2. That number. So therefore, regardless of what value of n, the remainder is going to be 2. Which means what will determine the value of the ultimate remainder is this other part here, the m value. That is what will determine the value of what our number is. So that is what we'll go for. So now we need to find out what is the value of m. If you know the value of m, then that will determine what the remainder is, because if m is 1, the remainder will be 0. If m is 2, the remainder is going to be 1. If m is 3, then m is going to be 2. And the remainder is going to be 2, r is going to be 2. So that is what we need to find out. So getting to know what the value of m is will help us to determine sufficiency. So that's what we need to know. So, and once you have this knowledge, then now we can go ahead and look at each statement independently and address the questions. So, let's look at the question. So, n is equal to 10. N is equal to 10, then we have 5 to 10 raised to the power n plus m. Then that is equal to 3q plus r. So our interest is in the value of m. So if m can take any value, then that statement will not be sufficient. Because if it can take 1, 2, 3, or 4, then we can have, in some cases, the answer will be, the remainder will be 0. In some cases, it will be different. So we'll have multiple values of r. We need to have just one definite value of r for a statement to be sufficient. So the first statement, as it is, n equals to 10, it tells us nothing about the value of m, but just reaffirms what you had seen earlier, that the remainder is going to be 2, and for m, whatever value m can take, it won't be sufficient. So this is not sufficient in itself. So that is to conclude. And if the second statement now, if you look at it, m is equal to 1. If m is equal to 1, then we have an answer, because we'll have a definite value of m. So that will mean that 50 plus 1, 5 plus 1, and then also 500 plus 1, 5,000 plus 1. All these will be multiples of 3, and therefore r will be 0. All of them multiples of 3, because you'll have 51, 6, 501, then 5,001, 1,001, yeah. So r is going to be 0, and it won't have multiples of r, it will only have one value of r. So the second statement is sufficient. So if you go back to the answer choices, we see that the second statement alone is sufficient, but the statement one alone is not sufficient, which is the answer in this case. So that is how we go about it. So getting to know what constitutes sufficiency is quite important, and it really saves you time when you get the statements.
You're watching Success with Bob Mwiti Show, presented to you by Upstack America. Upstack America is a consulting company that helps immigrants find amazing higher education and job opportunities in the tech industry in the United States. You can find our programs by going to www.upstackamerica.com. Upstack America, we wake you up to the unlimited potential.
Okay, let's look at the next question. If a certain positive integer is divided by 9, the remainder is 3. What is the remainder when the integer is divided by 5? That is what's being asked for. What the remainder is if the same integer is divided by 5. Now, this is a 600 to 700 level difficulty question, and these questions require some logic and reasoning to be able to get the answer. So let's first of all understand what this question stem says before we go to the statements. and understand what would constitute sufficiency. Certain integer, let's call it x, divided by 9, the remainder is 3. So we'll have 9 cube plus 3. Yeah. And then at the same time, we have the same integer divided by 5. So x divided by 5. We'll have 5y plus r. So being asked for the value of r here in this case. That's being asked. So we need to, as it is, it may not be so easy to find out what you have. What you just know is that from this number, from the first statement, x can be possibly what values? X can be, if the remainder is 3, we'll have, it can be 3 because if x is, let's say 3, then the remainder is going to be 3. It can be 12. It can be 18 plus 3, that's 21. 27 plus 3, that's 30. And so on and so forth. It can have multiple values. That is what we're seeing from this. So getting to know what would really help us to get a definite value of what is the relationship maybe between 9 and 5, then that will really help us to be able to demystify what sufficiency would be. Because we have these are two items we do have that are more or less like common in both scenarios, because we do have dividing it by 9, dividing it by 5. So we need to find a number which will divide by 5 and have a remainder. That is now the information we need. So what information can we get about 5 that will help us be able to get the values? Because we can get to know the information about 5 and x, then we can be able to match it to what we have in the given statement and get to know what that value is. So now let's go to the statements. If the integer is divided by 45, the remainder is 30. So x divided by 45 is equal to 45. Let's call it z plus 30. That's what you have if x divided by 45. 45 is plus 30. So which means this number, if you look at these two, 45 is a multiple of 5, and 30 is also a multiple of 5. Just by looking at it, you don't even need to go further to mystify it further, because all these will be multiples of 5. Hence, the remainder is going to be 0. So r is going to be 0. What is the remainder when the integer is divided by 5? So r is going to be 0 in this case. Just by looking at the number in its expression, then actually it is going to give us that. So we see the first statement to be sufficient, because r is giving us one value which is 0, we don't have multiple values. Now let's see second statement. The integer divided by 2 is divisible by 2. Now, if the integer is divisible by 2, which means it is even. Yeah, so x divided by 2 is equal to 2x. 2, let's say, no, 2, what do they call it? Let's say 2a, because a can be any value. X divided by 2 is equal to 2a, and the remainder is 0. So that is what we have. So in this case, if you look at these numbers, maybe you just note, okay, if you look at probably what you had earlier of the possible values, we're being told that x can be 12, x can be 30, then x can be any values that you can get that are multiples of 2. And so let's just try these two values and see if you divide by 5, what do you have? In the first case, r is equal to, if you divide by 5, r will be 2, and the second case will be 0. So we already have two values of r, and we don't even need to go beyond this. The moment you have two possible values of r, then actually, yes, we don't even need to go beyond that. It's not sufficient, because we have the remainder to be two values. You have either 0 or 2, just by the first trial. So this in itself is not sufficient. So given these two assessment of the statements, then actually I can say that the first statement is sufficient, or the second statement is not, which makes the answer choice A to be the correct answer. Now let's look at another question, which is also the difficulty of 600 to 700 level. When a positive integer n is divided by 25, the remainder is 13. what is the value of n? So we have n divided by 25. We have 25q plus 13. So what is the value of n? That's what being asked. So n is equal to 25q plus 13. So that is what this question is. So I was looking at. So being asked for the value of what n is. Yeah. Let's do this on a clean slate and just see. So we have n being equal to 25q plus 13. So depending on what the value of q is, you can have multiple values of n. So in this case, you can have probably n can be equal to, let's say, the 13. Then 25 plus 13, that is 38. Then also 50 plus 13, 63. 75 plus that is 88. And so on and so forth. We can just continue and continue. Let's just stop that there. So n can take any of these values. So they have a way of being able to determine what the values are. So if you're able to find a way of knowing what q is, then you can get to know what n is because you know what the remainder is. So if you get to know what q is, then you can get to know what the value of n is in this case. So let's take a look and see. Look at the statements now. The first statement says that n is less than 100. So if n is less than 100, then that's n can be any value of this. So 13, 38, 63, 88, and they are all satisfied the conditions. So this is definitely not sufficient. This is definitely not sufficient. So sufficient as it is. Then let's look at the next statement. When n is divided by 20, there when there's 3, so n is equal to 20 t plus 3. That is what you have as the value. And this one also is equal to the other one. So what values are we looking at of n in this case that will satisfy this condition? So in this case, what we're looking at is we can have n as 3, 23, 43, yeah, 63, 83, then 103. We can just stop there. So these are the multiple values of n that you can have and divide it by 20. Let's say that is just what you have. So 3 by 20, you have a remainder of 3. So on and so forth. So still, this doesn't help us get to know what the value of n is. So it's not sufficient. So let's try and put these two together because now that's the next step in the methodology because the first two statements are not sufficient. Now we can try combining them. If you combine them, we just try to look for that number which satisfy these conditions, which means the number is less than 100. At the same time, also, if you divide it by 20, you get 3 as a remainder. So let's look. We see there's no 13 in this case. That's out. Then 3 and now 13 are out. 38 now out. 23 also is out because it doesn't fit. Then we have 43, 63 here. We have 63 here. Oh, actually, it is. Then we have 63 here so much. We have another value because just to have one value because 43 is out. Is another one also? You have 88 and then 3 and so no, you have a match. The match is 63 because 63 is less than 100. At the same time, also 63 also when divided by 20, you get 3. If you divide by 25, also you get 13. So 63 is the answer. And therefore, if you combine these two together, you get a sufficient. You get sufficiency. So both statements together are sufficient, but neither statements alone is sufficient. And that will be the answer to this question. So I hope that you've been able to see how this plays out and how it works out. And I thank you for coming back. And should you have any questions, put them in the comments and also suggest any questions you may have that you may look at and demonstrate how to approach them. That is how we do approach these questions. And until next time, bye.